Welcome to our deep dive into stress and adaptation. As future nurses, this is something you'll be dealing with not just in your patients, but in yourselves too.
Yeah, it's so important, and it really is fascinating how different people react to stress.
Right. Even going back to when I was a nursing student, clinicals totally stressed me out.
Oh, yeah.
I'd get so anxious, like my stomach would be in knots.
Mhm.
I felt like I was running to the bathroom every 5 minutes. But then some of my classmates, they seemed totally cool and collected?
Oh, totally. And that's what's so interesting about stress. It's not one size fits all.
Yeah.
Like in the examples we have here, we see that Mei Fu gets these terrible headaches and diarrhea when she's stressed. Joan, on the other hand, she has this chronic bowel disease thing, and it just flares up whenever she feels overwhelmed.
Wow.
And then you've got Christopher, who gets so nervous before clinicals that he feels shaky and sick.
Oh, poor guy.
Yeah, it just goes to show that the same stressor can trigger completely different reactions in different people.
It's almost like we all have these, internal alarm systems, but they're all wired a little differently.
Exactly. And it's not just about those big life-changing events either.
Right.
Oh.
It's like those little everyday things can really add up.
Absolutely. Especially in a field like nursing where you're constantly on the go and dealing with, high-stakes situations. That's why it's so important to be self-aware and recognize your own personal stress signals.
So you can, manage them better.
Exactly. Now, when we talk about stress, we have to talk about what actually triggers those internal alarms. We call them stressors.
Okay, so stressors are like what sets off the stress response.
Exactly. And they can be divided into two main categories: physiologic and psychosocial.
So physiologic stressors, are those physical things that affect the body?
You got it. Think about a patient who's experienced a severe burn.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That's a major physiologic stressor. The body's going through a lot of trauma.
Makes sense. So would things like a high fever or a bad infection fall into that category too?
Absolutely. But it's not always so dramatic. Even something like not getting enough sleep.
Which happens to a lot of nurses, right?
All the time, unfortunately. Even that can be a huge physiologic stressor.
Wow, I never really thought about it like that.
Now, on the other hand, you have psychosocial stressors. These are more about how we perceive and interact with the world around us.
Okay, so it's more about our mental and emotional state.
Exactly. Think about a brand new nursing student, fresh out of school, facing their first ethical dilemma in a clinical setting.
Oh, I can only imagine.
That's a huge psychosocial stressor. That feeling of uncertainty and the weight of those decisions, it can really get to you.
It's like how we process and internalize those experiences, right?
Precisely. And the thing about psychosocial stressors is they don't always have to be things that are happening directly to us.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like our environment, past experiences, even things happening in the world, all of that can trigger stress.
So, how everyone felt during the pandemic?
Exactly. That's a perfect example. We were all dealing with this collective anxiety, this fear of the unknown, even if we weren't directly affected by the virus.
It was a really tough time for everyone.
It really was. And the effects of those kinds of major events, they can last a lot longer than people think.
That makes sense. So with all these stressors bombarding us, how does our body actually deal with it all?
Well, the human body is pretty amazing. We've evolved these incredibly sophisticated defense systems to protect us from harm. When it comes to stress, there are two main ways our bodies react: the local adaptation syndrome and the general adaptation syndrome.
Okay, those sound pretty complex. Break it down for us.
So the first one, local adaptation syndrome, we call it LAS for short. It's a localized response to stress. Think of it like a SWAT team being deployed to a very specific location.
So it's targeted, right? It's just
Yeah.
focused on one specific area.
Exactly. A classic example of LAS is the reflex pain response.
Like when you touch a hot stove and immediately pull your hand away.
That's it. It's a super fast, localized response that's designed to protect you from further injury. It's like your body's built-in safety mechanism.
It's amazing how quickly our bodies react to those kinds of threats. What about the other one, the general adaptation syndrome?
Ah, yes. GAS, as we call it. This one's a bit more dramatic.
Okay, how so?
Well, imagine LAS is like calling 911, but GAS is like a national emergency alert system going off.
Yeah, okay, that's a big difference.
Right. It's a full-body response to stress that affects every single system, and it involves 3 distinct stages.
Okay, walk us through those stages. What happens first?
Okay, so imagine you're walking down a dark street, and you hear footsteps behind you.
Okay, I'm already getting nervous.
Your heart starts pounding, you're breathing faster, your senses are heightened. That's the alarm stage.
That's our body's fight or flight response kicking in, right?
Exactly. Your body is flooded with adrenaline, preparing you to either confront the threat or run away.
But we can't stay in that heightened state forever, can we? What happens next?
If the stressor sticks around, you enter the resistance stage. Your body's trying to adapt and cope with the stress, but you're still on high alert. It's like a soldier holding their position during a tense standoff.
So your heart rate and breathing might slow down a bit, but you're still using a lot of energy just to maintain that state of readiness.
Exactly. And this is where chronic stress can really start to take a toll.
Because if that standoff never ends, your body never gets a chance to fully recover.
Precisely. And if that stress continues for too long, you reach the exhaustion stage. And this is where things can get pretty dangerous.
Especially for nurses who are constantly exposed to stressful situations.
Exactly. Imagine a nurse working in a busy ICU, dealing with critically ill patients, long hours, emotional strain. If they don't have the support and coping mechanisms to deal with all of that, their body can get stuck in that exhaustion stage.
And that's when burnout can happen, right? When you just feel completely drained and depleted.
And burnout is a huge problem in nursing. It's something we really need to be addressing.
For sure. So it's not just about feeling stressed or overworked. It's about that chronic depletion of our energy reserves that can impact everything we do, both in our personal lives and at work.
Yeah, and these stress response systems, they're important for nurses to understand for themselves, not just for their patients.
So we can take care of ourselves so we can take care of others, right?
Exactly. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about psychological homeostasis.
Okay, homeostasis. That sounds familiar, but refresh my memory. What exactly does that mean in a psychological context?
Well, just like our bodies need physical balance, we also need a sense of mental and emotional equilibrium.
So it's about feeling safe, secure, loved, valued, all those good things.
Precisely. Those are basic human needs that form the foundation for psychological well-being.
And I imagine when those needs aren't met, whether it's due to personal circumstances or, stressors at work, our mental and emotional state can really suffer.
Oh, absolutely. It's like trying to build a house on unstable ground. If those foundational needs aren't met, our sense of stability and well-being is completely compromised. Think about, for example, a single father who's trying to care for his disabled child while working long hours to make ends meet.
He's juggling so much, and there's so much pressure. It's no wonder that kind of chronic stress can take a toll on both his physical and mental health.
And it's a situation that so many people face, and nurses, are often the ones caring for those individuals and families.
That's so true. It really highlights how interconnected everything is, right? Stress, coping mechanisms, psychological well-being, they all play a role.
It's a complex web, for sure, but understanding those connections is essential for nurses because we need to be able to support our patients holistically, not just focus on their physical symptoms.
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to touch on a specific emotion that's often intertwined with stress.
Anxiety.
Oh, anxiety. That's a big one, and it's something every nurse is going to encounter, both in themselves and in their patients. I remember feeling so anxious before my first big exam in nursing school. My heart was racing, I was sweating, I could barely think straight.
We've all been there. While a little anxiety can be good, it keeps us motivated, too much anxiety can be completely debilitating.
It's like that feeling of stage fright you get before a performance. A little bit can help you focus and deliver your best, but too much and you just freeze up.
That's a great analogy. And in nursing, you're going to be facing situations that are far more intense than a stage performance.
Oh, for sure.
Think about the anxiety a nurse might feel when they're responding to a code blue or caring for a patient who's been in a serious accident.
In those moments, you need to be able to think clearly and act quickly. There's no room for hesitation.
Exactly. So how do we learn to manage that anxiety and prevent it from overwhelming us? Well, that's where coping mechanisms come in, and that's what we'll be diving into next.
Stay tuned, everyone. We'll be right back to explore the world of coping mechanisms and how they can help us navigate the stresses of nursing. Welcome back, everyone. We were talking about coping mechanisms before the break, like all the different ways we deal with stress.
And it's important to remember that those coping mechanisms, they're just one piece of the puzzle.
Right. There's so much more to it than that.
Exactly. Like, we've talked about how a little stress can actually be good for you, right?
Yeah.
It keeps you motivated, helps you perform under pressure.
But what happens when those stress alarms keep going off? Like day after day, what happens then?
That's when we start talking about chronic stress. And that's where things can get really serious.
Okay, so chronic stress, that's like when the stress just doesn't let up.
Exactly. And it can have a huge impact on, well, pretty much every aspect of your life, your physical health, your mental well-being, your relationships.
It can even affect your ability to, like, think clearly and make good decisions, right?
Absolutely. And we see the effects of chronic stress all the time in nursing.
Oh, for sure. Nurses are constantly exposed to stress, both at work and in their personal lives. It's just part of the job.
Yeah, and when that stress becomes chronic, it can lead to, all sorts of health problems.
Okay, so let's talk about that. Like, what kind of health problems are we talking about here?
Well, the research is pretty clear on this. Chronic stress increases your risk of things like cardiovascular disease,
That's high blood pressure, heart attacks.
Exactly. It also weakens your immune system.
So you're more likely to get sick.
Yep. And it can even contribute to mental health issues like anxiety and depression.
It's like chronic stress is this slow burn that just kind of wears you down over time.
That's a good way to put it. And that's why, self-care and stress management, those things are so important for nurses.
Because if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of your patients.
Exactly. And we've all seen it happen, right?
Oh, for sure. You see colleagues who are burnt out, and it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, they're exhausted, they're cynical, they're not the same people they used to be. And that's what burnout is, really. It's this state of complete emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion.
So it's not just about, like, feeling stressed or tired. It's more than that.
Right. It's like you've just hit a wall and you can't go any further. You don't have anything left to give.
And the scary thing is it can happen to anyone.
Anyone. So, the question is, what can we do about it? How do we prevent burnout in a profession that's, inherently stressful?
Right, because we can't just, like, eliminate stress altogether. It's always going to be there.
Exactly. So it's about learning how to manage that stress and build resilience.
Okay, so how do we do that? Where do we even start?
Well, one of the most important things is to create a culture of well-being at the organizational level.
So it's not just about what individual nurses do, it's about the whole system.
Exactly. You can't just tell nurses to meditate more or take more vacations and expect that to solve the problem.
Right, it's got to be a bigger, more systemic change.
Yeah.
Exactly. It starts with recognizing that nurses are the backbone of healthcare, and their well-being is directly tied to patient safety and quality of care.
So it's in everyone's best interest to support nurses and make sure they're not burning out.
Absolutely. That means things like, reasonable workloads, manageable patient ratios, adequate staffing levels. Those things make a huge difference.
And it also means creating a culture where nurses feel comfortable, speaking up and asking for help when they need it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just about the workplace either.
Right, because nurses don't just leave their stress at work, they bring it home with them.
Exactly. So family support is really important too.
Like just having someone to talk to, someone who understands what you're going through, that can make a world of difference.
It can. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about another aspect of stress that nurses often deal with. Families.
Oh yeah, families. Because when a patient is sick, it affects the whole family, right?
Exactly. And families often go through their own version of the general adaptation syndrome, that alarm resistance exhaustion cycle we talked about earlier.
So they're dealing with their own stress on top of everything else that's going on.
Exactly. And just like individuals, families have different ways of coping, some healthy, some not so healthy.
So as nurses, what can we do to support those families who are, really struggling?
Well, first and foremost, we need to recognize that the family is part of the care team.
They're not just visitors, they're an essential part of the patient's support system.
Exactly. So we need to assess their needs, provide them with information and resources, encourage open communication, all those things.
It's about empowering them to be active participants in the healing process.
Exactly. And sometimes families need a little extra help,
Like maybe a referral to a social worker or a therapist.
Exactly. And there's another term I want to bring up that's particularly relevant to family caregivers. Caregiver burden?
Caregiver burden. Okay, I'm not familiar with that one.
So caregiver burden is the emotional, physical, and financial strain that can result from, caring for a loved one who has a chronic illness or a disability.
It's like all the stress and responsibility of being a caregiver.
Yeah.
It can really take its toll.
It can. And it's a form of chronic stress that can have serious health consequences for the caregiver themselves.
So it's not just about the stress of the illness. It's the ongoing demands of providing care day in and day out.
Exactly. Caregivers often put their own needs on hold. They sacrifice their sleep, their social lives, their own health, all to take care of their loved one.
Wow, it's like they're the unsung heroes of healthcare. They're doing such important work, but often at a great personal cost.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important for nurses to be aware of caregiver burden and offer support.
Like encourage them to take breaks, seek out support groups, prioritize their own self-care.
Exactly. Remind them that taking care of themselves is not selfish, it's necessary.
They can't pour from an empty cup.
Exactly. Now, let's switch gears one more time and talk about another type of stress that can have a huge impact. Crisis.
Crisis. Okay, that word always makes me think of something really intense and scary.
Well, a crisis is basically a situation that overwhelms a person's usual coping mechanisms.
So it's like you're faced with something so big, so unexpected, that you don't know how to deal with it.
Exactly. And it can be triggered by a lot of different things, a sudden illness, a natural disaster, a job loss, the death of a loved one.
It's like your whole world gets turned upside down and you're lost.
Exactly. And that's where crisis intervention comes in.
Okay, so what is crisis intervention?
It's basically a specialized approach to helping individuals and families navigate those acute crises.
So it's like providing immediate support and helping them get back on their feet.
Exactly. And nurses are often on the front lines of crisis intervention. They might encounter patients who are experiencing a mental health crisis, a medical emergency, all sorts of things.
So what are some of the key skills that nurses need to effectively intervene in those situations?
Well, first and foremost, it's about staying calm and creating a sense of safety and support for the person who's in crisis.
So active listening, clear communication, all those things are really important.
Absolutely. And we also need to be able to assess the situation quickly, identify any immediate needs, and connect the person with the appropriate resources.
It's like being a first responder, not just for their physical health, but for their emotional and psychological well-being too.
Exactly. Now, before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, I want to take a moment to address all you future nurses out there. Nursing school is a stressful time, so it's really important to develop healthy coping mechanisms early on.
What are some things that nursing students can do to, manage that stress and stay healthy?
Well, self-care is absolutely crucial.
Like what kind of self-care are we talking about?
The basics, really. Get enough sleep, eat healthy foods, exercise regularly, make time for things you enjoy.
All the stuff we know we should be doing, but don't always make time for, right?
Exactly. And remember, nursing is a team sport. Lean on your classmates, support each other, celebrate each other's successes. You're all in this together.
That's such a great reminder. And as you move into your clinical rotations and eventually your professional practice, keep in mind everything we've talked about today.
Be mindful of your own stress levels, use your coping toolkit, and don't be afraid to advocate for yourself and your colleagues. You deserve to be healthy and well, both for your own sake and for the sake of your patients.
That's a powerful message. And remember, asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength.
It shows you're committed to your own well-being and the well-being of your patients. Now, in the last part of our deep dive, we're going to get really practical and talk about specific strategies for managing stress and building resilience, both in your personal life and at work.
We're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into stress and adaptation. We've talked about how stress works, the challenges nurses face, and now it's time for the good stuff, the solutions. How do we actually manage stress, build resilience, and prevent burnout? What can we actually do?
This is where it gets really empowering, because while we can't always control the stressors in our lives, we can definitely learn to control how we respond to them.
I love that. It's about taking back that sense of control. So what are some of the most effective strategies, the things that really work? Help us load up our stress-busting toolkit.
Okay, first and foremost, we've got to talk about healthy lifestyle habits. I know you've heard it all before, but seriously, this stuff is the foundation of resilience.
Okay, I'm listening. Remind me why those basics are so important.
Think about it this way. Imagine you're a car, and stress is the wear and tear of daily driving. If you're running on low fuel, skipping maintenance, and pushing your engine to the limit all the time, you're going to break down eventually.
I like that analogy. So what kind of fuel are we talking about here? And what kind of maintenance do we need to prioritize?
All right, well, first off, we need quality sleep. That's when our bodies and minds repair and recharge themselves.
Makes sense. But it's not always easy to get enough sleep, especially when you're working long hours or night shifts.
Oh, I know, it's tough. But aim for 7 to 8 hours of sleep each night if you can. And even little things can make a big difference, like sticking to a consistent sleep schedule, creating a relaxing bedtime routine.
So it's about creating those good sleep habits, even on your days off.
Exactly. Consistency is key. And the other piece is, of course, nutrition. You got to fuel your body with good stuff.
Like putting premium gas in your car.
Yes. Focus on whole, unprocessed foods,
Yeah,
fruits, vegetables, lean proteins, those kinds of things.
we can't forget about exercise.
Absolutely. Exercise is like taking your car for a spin. It helps everything run more smoothly. It releases endorphins, reduces stress hormones, improves sleep, just all around good stuff.
Even if it's just a quick walk or yoga session.
Anything that gets you moving is a win. Okay, so we've got sleep, nutrition, exercise. Now let's talk about mindfulness.
Mindfulness, that's a
Yeah.
buzzword I hear a lot these days. But honestly, I'm not always sure what it means. Bring it down for me.
Sure. Mindfulness is all about being present in the moment, without judgment. It's about noticing your thoughts and feelings, but not letting them control you.
So instead of dwelling on the past or worrying about the future, we're learning to just be here now.
Exactly. And the great thing about mindfulness is that you can practice it anywhere, anytime. Just take a few minutes each day to focus on your breath, notice the sensations in your body, or just observe the world around you.
So it's like taking a mental break from all the chaos.
Yeah, exactly. Now, another tool that's really helpful for stress management is relaxation techniques.
Oh yeah, those are great. Like what are some examples of those?
Well, you've got deep breathing exercises, progressive muscle relaxation, visualization, all sorts of things. They all help to slow down your heart rate, ease muscle tension, quiet the mind.
I love visualization. It's like taking a mini vacation in your mind.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of laughter either. Watching a funny movie, sharing a joke with a friend, even just giggling at something silly, that can be incredibly stress relieving.
Laughter is definitely the best medicine sometimes.
Okay.
So we've got mindfulness, relaxation techniques, and a good dose of humor. What else should we add to our stress-busting toolkit?
Well, this one's huge. Social connection. Humans are social creatures. We're wired for connection, and when we feel isolated or lonely, our stress levels just skyrocket.
It's like our social connections are our support system, helping us navigate the tough times.
Exactly. So make time for meaningful connections with people you care about, join a club, volunteer, even just strike up a conversation with someone new. You'll be surprised at how much those interactions can boost your mood and resilience.
And speaking of reaching out, it's so important to remember to ask for help when we need it.
Oh, absolutely. We often try to tough it out on our own, but that can be a recipe for disaster.
It's like we think we have to be strong all the time, but it's okay to admit when we need help.
Exactly. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength and self-awareness. It shows you care about your well-being, and it can make a huge difference in your ability to cope with stress.
Whether it's talking to a friend, a mentor, a therapist, whatever you need. And I think that's a great message to end on, that it's okay to reach out for support. And remember, as future nurses, you're going to be part of a team. So lean on your colleagues, support each other, celebrate each other's successes.
You're all in this together. And by taking care of yourselves, you're taking care of your patients, too. It's a win-win.
Well, listeners, that wraps up our deep dive into stress and adaptation. We've covered a lot of ground, but the most important takeaway is that you have the power to manage stress, build resilience, and thrive in your nursing journey.
Absolutely. Be kind to yourselves, prioritize self-care, and never hesitate to ask for help when you need it. You're the heart of healthcare, and your well-being matters.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. Keep learning, keep growing, and keep on diving.